I see guys and gals who went to Harvard, have the silver spoon, get the job as the partner at the private equity group, and they're trying to tell an entrepreneur how to run a company properly, I kind of get my back up. I'm like, go do something with your life. You were born on 30, you hit a triple. Like, go do something, and then you'll have the right to tell others how to do something. So I didn't go to business school. I dropped out of university early. So yeah, I got a bit of a chip on my shoulder, probably still do. And so a lot of what my professional life is now is basically helping entrepreneurs punch above their weight when it comes to selling their business. And think about that for a second. Punch above your weight. It's a little bit like a David and Goliath battle. Part of that for me is there are these mercenary private equity groups trying to steal your company. They've done nothing in their life other than been born on third base. Don't let them do that. Don't let them buy your business for 2 times EBITDA, borrow a bunch of money, and then sell it for 8 times EBITDA. Don't fall victim to that. You're better than that.
Today, I'm sitting with John Warrillow. John is the developer of the Sellability Score software application and the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You. This is a special interview for me because John is literally one of my professional docents. I read John's book, Built to Sell, in 2013 on a beach in Hawaii while on vacation. After reading John's book, I realized my business was not focused enough and it was too dependent on me and my wife. I productized our business and we transformed it into a business that could thrive without us. I really enjoyed my conversation today with John. John is a humble, charismatic, and genuine individual, and I really believe you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. So with that said, let's dive in with John Warrillow. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like and comment below. And to find future episodes in your feed and push notifications, make sure you subscribe. And if you click the little bell, you'll get every new episode as it's released. Thanks again for watching. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jay.
So as you know, the first question I ask people is, you got to tell me who's in your top 5. These are the 5 people that you surround yourself with the most professionally these days. We're trying to see who the average you are of the people you surround yourself with.
Yeah, I'm a big podcast listener, maybe because I have one. I also listen to other people's for ideas. So a lot of my top 5 are actually podcasters who I kind of know, in some cases. But Rob Walling runs a great podcast, Startups for the Rest of Us, which is kind of a cool show about SaaS companies that are not funded, which is fun. Have you heard of any of his stuff?
I haven't, no.
It's worth checking out. It's especially if you're just starting a SaaS company. Scott Galloway is a very controversial figure. He's the Prof G guy who very polarizing, but I really like his sort of breakdown of a lot of companies. So I tend to listen to his show a lot. There's a guy you would not have heard of. His name is Trevor Curry. And he taught me how to speak in public. So he's a trainer on speaking. And I found him enormously helpful. We've hired him at Value Builder and he's helped a lot of our sales guys as well. But Trevor and I know each other sort of outside of business. And I find he's one of those guys, and you're probably one of them as well. I'm sure you are one of them. Is just really well read and always curious. And so I love just going for a run or a bike ride because he's always got the latest story. He's read some article and we have a good conversation. So he's up there for me. Those are a few of the folks that are my docents, if you will.
Currently, right? Yeah. And that's the other thing about docents, right? They keep changing as you kind of get older, and as a kid, it's your parents, and then your teachers, your coaches.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we do that, John? Let's go all the way back to John Warrillow as a child. Tell us where you grew up, maybe your socioeconomic kind of background, what your parents did for a living, siblings. Give us a little purview into little John.
Oh man, it's not that sexy. I'm happy to do it, but my parents emigrated from England when I was 5, so I showed up with a funny English accent in Canada, Toronto, and so I worked hard, I think, to get rid of the accent.
You did a great job,
but maybe there's a little part of me that's always felt a little bit outside of the sort of mainstream because of having to join a new society, join a new classroom. I mean, I'm sure people have had it much harder. They've come from much further countries, different cultures. But for me, I came from a different place, I guess. And I had a pretty normal. My dad was in media, publishing, magazines, newspapers, and so that was a cool window into business and media, actually. So he had a very interesting and eclectic set of friends because of the media stuff. And I learned a lot about, the subscription business model, at the knee of my dad, who kind of taught me that, there's a chapter in the Automatic Customer, the book I wrote about recurring revenue, saying subscribers are better than customers. And it's a bit of a kind of controversial topic, but it's one that I learned very early, like 14 years old, that, better to get a subscriber than a customer.
It's funny you say, I'm writing that down. Subscribers are better than customers. So a few years ago, my cousin has this. It's funny. He's in an ad agency as well. But I told you I had a business that was like an ad agency. You wrote a book with Parable about ad agencies. My cousin's in the ad business too, and very uninspiring. He got to a point where he was working from home as a contractor, working for them. And I said, let's go start a business together. And I have a neighbor started Hand and Stone, which I told you about. The Hand and Stone guy has like 500 locations. I got another neighbor who's a franchisee, not the founder, the franchisor. He's the franchisee of Planet Fitness, and he has like 70 locations. So these two guys are in franchising, and I said, we got to do franchising. And there was this business around here called Playa Bowls, which was an acai bowl shop. I thought, we could do something like that. This bowl concept seems to be taking off. Maybe we'll do poke bowls. My dad lived out in Hawaii for a while, and I visited him out in Hawaii, and I had poke bowls. So that kind of gave me the idea. I was like, yeah, poke is pretty cool. Why isn't it here in New Jersey? So we started a poke bowl shop. And I wish I would have heard that subscribers are better than customers, because in the food business, it's very transit. They kind of come and go, foot traffic. But the two reasons why, those two neighbors and why they killed it, subscriptions, right? The Hand and Stone, it was subscriptions, right? They had them on monthly subscriptions, and whether you came or not for that massage, you were being charged. And the same thing for the gym. You're right, man. I mean, I found it out the hard way. We lost in that business.
Well, subscriptions are everywhere now. One of my favorite that is really, I love the stories of old school industries that are moving to subscription. One of my favorite is the car wash industry. Because car washes, they used to be, you in New Jersey, like super seasonal, right? So everyone wants their car wash in May to get the salt and crap and grime, but nobody's washing their car in November or December, right? And so it's very, very lumpy. And a few people started experimenting with these. I think Mr. Car Wash was the first major chain that did it, but it was these all-you-can-eat, basically, subscription models where you can get your car washed as much as you want. And you might say, well, why would they ever do that? That's going to cost them a truckload of money. Well, it actually evens out their revenue, right? Because you're getting the $30 a month in November as well as May, and it's a great business model. And private equity is out there buying up these kind of mom and pop car washes, moving them to subscription, and making out like bandits. It's fun to watch.
I never thought of that, because I know the private equity firms, they bought out Hand and Stone. They bought out my friend who has a large group of franchisees. He's a franchisee, large group of Planet Fitnesses. They love these businesses. They love subscription models because it's predictable revenue. As long as they know that I could spin up a new location, on average, we're going to do this, right? Really hard to do with a customer.
They even love it more if they can get an industry that has not made the transformation and buy that company for 2 times EBITDA, put in a subscription model and sell it for 8, 10, 12 times EBITDA later. Like, that's the panacea for these guys. So in the case of car washes, there's a lot of old school car washes who think the value of their business is the land, the dirt underneath their car wash, which is what it was 50 years ago. But now it's totally transformed.
Let's go back to you again. I want to go back to your early life. Was there anything other than moving from the UK over to the United States, any kind of trauma on any sort? Because I've noticed there's a strong correlation between high achievers and something which is funny. I had Jeff Booth, the author of The Price of Tomorrow, on, and he was talking about some early trauma with his parents and money. He goes, but if from their perspective, when I talk about it, this was not trauma for them. He's like, it was for me and the way I was perceiving it. Sometimes as a kid, it's more traumatic to you, and it changes the way you are more than your parents even recognize. They're like, wait, you were worried about that? Was there anything like that in your childhood?
Funny?
Yeah, it is funny, because I'm sure my kids are doing that right now.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure I'm screwing up my kids as we speak. I'm just trying to think of all the ways that, no.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry if you're watching this in the future.
Yeah, sort of advanced. Look, I was, growing up, I was pretty overweight. That was what was my bugbear. And so I was, that really formed a lot of my personalities, because I wasn't picked for the teams. I wasn't on like that stuff. And I remember going through, I always felt like, I don't know exactly the right words for it, but I just felt like I was outside of the mainstream for that
Sure.
reason. And I remember being at university and having gone through kind of this, I don't want to say traumatic event. It wasn't, I didn't see it as traumatic. It's just sort of, I felt like I was on the outside. And I was watching on TV the Ironman triathlon that they had the wild world of sports. Can't remember exactly who
Yeah,
covered
I
it. But
remember that.
it was
Yeah.
this is a long time ago now. And I turned to my housemates at the time, this is in second year university, saying, "How long do you think it would take to train for that?" And here I am, the kind of the chubby guy asking this question, right? And they're like, "Oh, it'd take years, man." And I'm like, "I bet you I could do it in a year." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever." And I'm like, "All right." And I trained. 8 months later, I did a full Ironman, and
Nice.
that's a little bit like fuck you, right? Like
Yes.
it was a little bit like it was kind of coming out of me, and it's been kind of coming out of me since then. Like since that, like I took arts in school, and it's such a crappy degree because there's nothing you can do with it. It's so subjective. All the courses I took in high school were like subjective; they weren't objective, and so I felt like, like like life was very squishy. I was squishy, and life was very squishy. But that moment where I did that, I started to formulate a, a different sort of relationship with achievement. I kind of started to realize, okay, whatever I decide I want to do, I can do. And I know that sounds cliche, and your parents told you that when you were a kid, but up until that point, I don't think I'd actually realized that in the same way. And so now, flash forward to businesses is great because it's very objective. You know how you're scoring every day. And I love that, right? Like I love that sense of being in total control of winning or losing. And when I lose, there's no one else other than myself to blame. And when I win, I get to feel like that's that rush of achievement that I lacked as the kind of kid who was on the sidelines a lot as a kid, if that makes sense. I don't want to paint this picture like I had this terrible childhood. I didn't, but I never felt like, those guys and the captain of the cheerleading squad, the captain of the quarterback of the team who was the first one picked for, whatever, fill in the blank, the debating the high school president, the sports team. That was never me. And as a result, I feel like I maybe had something to prove, and as a result, maybe to some extent even today feel a little bit like that, if that makes any sense.
All right. You'd mentioned your father. I like to talk about fatherhood a little bit. I'm a father. I got 4 kids. I know your father. I'd like to discuss your relationship with your father and how that may have had an impact on you professionally as well as personally, just growing up. And what key values do you feel make up a good father?
Wow, that's heavy, man. I was expecting this lightweight interview, and you're like going deep on me. Oh man. Sorry, there was like a 4-part question. What was the first part?
Basically, just want to discuss the relationship that you had with your father and how that may have affected
Yeah.
you and like impacted you. And then just what do you think the key values of being a great father or a good father are?
Yeah, I mean, my parents were one of the things that made them really unique as parents is they, from a very young age, it was always my decision. At least they made it feel like everything that I did was my decision. And that's weird. Like, so for example, at 16, if there was a party or whatever, and they would say, instead of saying you need to be home by midnight, they would say, "What time are you going to be home?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was like this test, right? Like if I, I'm like, because if I, threw out like a very conservative number, like I'll be home by 10:30, they'd be like, okay, that's fine. But I would have just shot myself in the foot. Equally, if I said some outlandish number, like
That's
I'll
not
be
going to
home
work.
at 4 in the morning, that's not going to work. But they didn't actually ever, like they always made it feel like it was my decision, which was a really unique parenting style as I reflect on it now as a
They gave you
parent.
the
Yeah.
autonomy. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah. And look, my dad was the guy who, I can remember him driving off at 6:30 kind of every morning. Like I can remember weekends, him poring over his briefcase. And that, again, I say that not in any way resentful, because I didn't look at it like he would always drop whatever he was doing to to be with me and answer a question that I had. But in the absence of my questions, he would always be working, right?
Yeah.
Like, and again, not in a way that I felt like I was being passed over, but if I was busy doing something and happily doing so, his default was work, like every evening, every weekend, all the time. And maybe I learned a little bit about kind of work ethic and from just by osmosis. But again, I don't want to characterize him.
Well, let me ask you,
in
does that
any
affect
way.
the way you parent? Are you always working as well? Or do you recognize dad was like that? I'm going to spend a little more time, I'll force myself, or do you just naturally just spend more time with the kids? Or how are you with your kids?
Different times. I mean, I think right now I spend a lot of time with my kids, and I think, I'm happy with that decision. And I do focus on the work a lot. Like in talking to the kids, I try not to focus on the results. I try to focus on the work. I'm a huge believer in Mindset, the book by Carol Dweck. You're a big reader.
Heard of it, yeah.
You know that one. For folks who haven't read it, I mean, it's a great book. It basically makes the point that there are two types of people in the world. There are people with a fixed mindset, those with a growth mindset. Fixed mindset are, as parents, people who grow up with parents who praise them for the results that they achieve. You're a fantastic athlete. Man, Jay, you're so creative. You're so funny. You're so smart. You're so athletic. Those are all ways to reinforce a fixed mindset, because when kids grow up hearing that they're smart, funny, creative, athletic, it starts to become part of their body armor, like how they present themselves to the world. And it becomes so important to them that they don't want to challenge themselves in those areas for fear of losing that status. So kids who are really athletic when they're 12 end up being 16 and really kind of plateau.
I saw that a lot with kids my age when we grew up. Some that were really good
Yeah,
when
like
they were
they're
younger
the
weren't so
elite
great.
athlete at 12, and then they're kind of like, they're good, but they're not like outstanding at 16. It's because in many cases, at least this is what Carol Dweck would argue, that we just stop challenging ourselves because we fear losing that status that our parents have given us as young people. The growth mindset is the exact opposite. It's never praising results, always praising the effort, right? So I try not to focus too much when I parent on what mark did you get, how many hits did you get, or how many strikeouts. What I try not to do that. I try to focus on the work that you put in. And on my best days, I'm able to really focus on that. I'm a big Brett Ledbetter fan. You talked about docents. This is one a lot of folks may not have heard of. Do you know Brett Ledbetter?
No.
Do you know that name? You should get him on the show. He is a real. I've never met Brett, but he's a docent from afar for me, because I've read sort of everything he's produced. He runs a company called What Drives Winning, and it's mostly a subscription business for college coaches.
Okay.
And he teaches college coaches how to create winning cultures in their organizations. He's got a big conference, subscription model, content, etc., books. And he interviews these very famous coaches, from basketball coach from Villanova, or like the Alabama head coach in football, like all these very famous coaches, and sort of tries to unpack what it is culturally they do in their organization to make them winning. And he came by that topic or that area of interest very personally. When he was a young teenager, he was a phenom basketball player. I think he was out of Indiana. And he would score 40 points a game and was the most incredible athlete on the court. But he started to believe his own sort of media. And by the time he was 18, he had plateaued to such an extent that he didn't get a single college scholarship. And his whole life journey, now he's in his 40s, his whole journey has been to try to unpack like what happened. How did he go from being this rock star athlete to being kind of passed over? And a lot of it comes back to this kind of idea of fixed mindset, and like him approaching the world in the armor that his parents had sort of enveloped him in, which is, you're a stud athlete, you're going to be amazing. And he just he lost the edge to challenge himself. And that's Brett. Great stuff. If you check him out, Brett Ledbetter, just Google him and you'll see lots of stuff.
Let me ask you a question, because I don't know if I would struggled with this, but I certainly feel that I'm one of these people. Do you, or did you seek approval or affirmation from others, like your parents, maybe, maybe now your spouse, your kids. Is that something for you? It's always been like that for me personally. And I say approval. I don't necessarily mean approval, but you're trying to make people proud around you.
I think there's probably an element of that. It's dulled a little bit, if that makes sense, Jay. Like, I think probably in my 20s, maybe in my 30s, I was really keen for that. I don't know that I feel it in a quite as acute way as I used to. Maybe having kids has changed that a little bit for me, because I realize maybe I don't want my own kids to always seek my approval on things that I'm attempting to. I'm not sure. I wouldn't say it's a driving force in my life. It probably was, in my younger years. I think I'm more driven by, the need to achieve, to sort of wash away that sense of lack of achievement when I was younger, if that makes any sense. But I'm not sure. It's almost more to proving it to myself than to others, if I could try to unpack it.
Did you sort of have like a chip on your shoulder too, when you were trying to get there?
Still do a bit. I think when I see what, I joked about private equity companies rolling up, car wash businesses, but I kind of get, when I see guys and gals who went to Harvard,
the pedigree,
have the silver spoon, get the job as the partner at the private equity group, and they're trying to tell an entrepreneur how to run a company properly. I kind of get my back up. I'm like, go do something with your life. You were born on 30. You hit a triple. Like, go do something, and then you'll have the right to tell others how to do something. So I didn't go to business school. I dropped out of university early. I got a bit of a chip on my shoulder, probably still do. And so a lot of what my professional life is now is basically helping entrepreneurs punch above their weight when it comes to selling their business. And think about that for a second. Punch above your weight. It's a little bit like a David and Goliath battle. Part of that for me is like, there are these mercenary private equity groups trying to steal your company.
That's right.
They've done nothing in their life other than been born on third base. Don't let them do that. Don't let them buy your business for 2 times EBITDA, borrow a bunch of money, and then sell it for 8 times EBITDA. Don't fall victim to that. You're better than that. So there's a lot of rebellious kind of, motivations in that. If you kind of try to unpack it a little bit.
We're going to get to that in a few minutes, because we'll talk about the story of how I read your book and you helped me punch above my weight, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no question. Like, when I was being approached by venture capitalists in my early 20s, I didn't know what venture capital even was. I mean, that's hilarious now, because now I'm a VC myself, right? Like, I'm not a venture capitalist, I'm an angel investor, but it's venture capital either way, right? I didn't even know what the hell it was, right? These guys are calling me up, they're talking about stuff, setting term sheets. I'm like, you read through these terms, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And then you talk to other people, lawyers that do this kind of stuff, venture attorneys. They're like, no, it's market. What's market mean? It's conventional. I'm like, conventional? Who's doing this shit? They're like, everybody. Yeah. And I was like, that's a collusional effort if this is what's going on widespread. This is crazy, But I don't want to get into the details of that, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're listening to this and you don't know, go look up venturehacks.com if you don't know what we're talking about. Naval Ravikant, who started AngelList, has a great table of contents of all the different types of terms that VCs put in these term sheets. Oh boy, you could sit here and do like 10 episodes on that.
A very strong coffee.
Exactly. But let me ask you, John, what is your superpower? What is the one thing that you're the best at?
I don't know that I have a superpower. I think if there's one thing that I do try to pride myself on, is to communicate a complex idea in relatively simple terms. So, and again, I think that's because I like to communicate. I think that communications is an area that I focus on. And so whether that's writing or speaking, and I try to do it in a way that makes the complex relatively easy to understand. So for example, when I do Built to Sell Radio and I interviewed you, I'm like, what on earth does your company do? And you like give me the kind of spiel that entrepreneurs can't help themselves, right? Because they've said it so many freaking times, right? But they're like, oh, well, we have a hosted cloud-based blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
You're
right.
like,
Buzz,
okay,
buzz,
I have
buzz.
no idea what you said, right? But in your case, you're like, we were kind of YouTube before YouTube. Great, get it. Awesome. So you've got a gift for communication, but that is rare. And so if there's one thing I like to do is try to take someone who, a concept, an idea, a conceptual way of thinking, and make it digestible. And it's a real fine line, because oftentimes, one of the things, the simple versus simplistic is a very fine line to walk, right? Making complex simple is great. Making people feel like a moron is not great. And so I think it's a really
you don't want to be
fine line
patronizing when you say something simple. Yeah.
right? And try to dumb it down to the point where the guy's like, yeah, I get it. But at the same time, you also don't want to throw out a bunch of acronyms and a bunch of terms that people are like, I think he sounds smart, but I don't have a clue what he's talking about, right? And so that's where I.
So there's this company called Strike, run by Jack Mallers. It's in the cryptocurrency Bitcoin space, right? I shouldn't say crypto with him; it's Bitcoin for him, right? And then so El Salvador just made Bitcoin a legal tender, right? And he goes down there and he sets up the country and all the different merchants like McDonald's and Starbucks and a bunch of these like major corporations that are on there, so they can accept Bitcoin through his services, which are Strike on the Lightning Network. And he does this video and he explains, like, it's an introduction and showing the world like, hey, this works. And he literally does it on a video. And then when he speaks to the camera, did exactly what you were saying. He had all these crazy big buzzwords. He's a young guy in his early to mid 20s is my guess, maybe early 30s. I don't know how old Jack is, but it reminded me of myself in my early to mid 20s where I was trying to, I didn't know I was intentionally doing this, but I think subconsciously I was trying to sound smart. Maybe it was an inferiority complex to some extent, because you're surrounded by venture capitalists and smart people. And like you said, the pedigree, the people from Harvard and stuff like that. And you're kind of trying to punch above your weight, I think is what I thought Jack was sort of doing. I was like, he probably could explain this in like 3 sentences. Why did he take 50 seconds to do this with all these buzzwords? And I looked at his face and no wrinkles and gray hair. And I was like, now I know why I did it. Because I did the same shit when I was his age. But he has an amazing product. And it's an amazing business. It's going to transform lives across the world. But he's talking about it like he's talking to a venture capitalist and it's going to the public in a retail market. Yeah.
And again, sometimes that can serve you well if you want to signal to the tribe that you're part of the in group and you don't mind excluding everybody else. That's great. And maybe that was his intent, right?
Could be.
But if the intent is widespread adoption of your
I think
idea,
it's widespread adoption. I mean, call me crazy. I think he wants everybody to use it. So I was like,
use Bitcoin. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He's not trying to snow everybody. Yeah.
No, right. And by the way, I don't think he is. I think it was just, again, it's the way, it's very difficult. Like I had raised money for an idea and it took me and my co-founder, the sentence to say will take me 10 seconds when I say it. It probably took us 2 weeks of brainstorming every other day, like trying to get this distilled down very quickly. So we made it an analogy, and it was, if MySpace is your autobiography, then WikiU is your unauthorized biography. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what that means just by saying it, right? And if you didn't, we would just follow it up with, it's the biography of every person on earth written by everybody else. Pretty simple, right? But to do, most people would say, well, it's sort of like Wikipedia where you can edit and this, and it would just have this long-winded explanation of how it works. Don't tell me the how, right? That's the problem. So that's a great superpower that you have, and it really takes a lot of practice to be good at that. And that's something I've been working on for a long time. It's not an easy thing, so I appreciate that you consider that to be a superpower.
Well, it's something I'm not sure if, again, it's a superpower, but I might need to, I would be very fixed mindset of me to say it was a superpower.
Well, if that's your superpower, if that's your superpower, like Superman, what's your kryptonite?
Oh man, I've got tons of those. Anything complicated makes my brain blow up, and that's probably why I try to distill simple things. But when things get complicated, I get really overwhelmed. So that's, if a business or project needs a concerted amount of, like I see these guys and gals who are like McKinsey consultants or Accenture consultants, and they can literally go on a Sunday night to a project and they will work 14 hours a day in some godforsaken factory in some tiny little town, and they will pore over like the data for 14 hours eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the same boardroom, and they'll go do it all again the next day. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I could never do that. Like, I don't have the attention span, the engine, like the intellectual horsepower to sustain myself through a complicated problem over that amount of time. And I see some of the technology folks that build great businesses also have that engine that they can literally focus on a problem for 10, 12, 14 hours. I don't have that.
Interesting.
Like 45 minutes into a conversation, I want to leave. I have to get up, I have to walk around. So that means I will never build a very large company. Like a very large company has, I think, it, you you need to have the ability to absorb a lot of information without getting overwhelmed. And I don't have that. I have the ability to consume a small amount of information and act on it and maybe translate it. But once it gets too complicated with too many variables, I just shut down. And that means that I'm not wired to run a very large business. It's just, there's a lot of things I'm not wired to do. I'm not wired to put together IKEA furniture. Like literally, Jay, you
That's
would
so funny.
laugh at watching me try to put IKEA furniture together because like it confounds me. I can't look at the visuals and make the thing do
Yeah,
what
my
it's
wife has to
supposed
help
to
me.
do. It's just like, why can't they make a frigging video? Like, do we have to have these little stick men and like?
Yeah.
But again, the complicated is
You're like, is
not
this
my
the big
strong
screw or
suit.
the little screw? Wait a second.
Yeah,
Well, I listened to this actually, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a guy that's authored all these books. That's complex. But then I also remember when you introduced me into the show, you're like, guys, this interview was tough for me. So I'm thinking about me with you because I'm so high energy. And you're like, you got to slow it down, go to 0.8. I was like, that's great.
right. Yeah, you know what some people. Yeah, you're right. That's what I said in my intro of you. I'm like, those people you want to speed up. You don't want to do that, Jay. You want to put it on 0.8 on your playback because there's a lot of information coming at you really fast.
That's so funny. Another thing I found with most of the high achievers is that they have an obsession, right? I told you about the book I read from Tim Grover and Relentless. Yeah, Relentless. And, and he talks about Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and others, and how they're completely relentless, totally obsessed with their craft. I don't know. They were putting in a lot of hours, but you don't necessarily have to put in a lot of hours to be obsessed. Like if you're writing a book, that's got to be the only thing you're focused on for some time. I'm writing a book, so it's not easy. Why don't you kind of walk us through the obsession that you have to have, or that you may have had? I shouldn't say you have to. Maybe you didn't. That you've had potentially when you were writing your books or in your career in general, and did it have any impact on your personal relationships?
Yeah, interesting. I'm a stickler for detail when it comes to written communications. So I can't handle seeing bad writing. And so when I write, it has to be done as best as I can. I can't sort of do it half-assed. I can do a lot of things half-assed. I can't write half-assed. It's got to be good. And so that makes me really difficult to work with if you if you don't really have an appreciation for the written word. So some of the most difficult kind of conversations that I've had with people that work for me are around communications, like written communications. And so that has burned some relationships because I can't see past it. Like if I see a grammatical error, it ruins an entire 1,000-word document for me. Like I can't get beyond the simplistic. And it's so ridiculous because clearly there can be a tremendous thought put into a 1,000-word document.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
because one word isn't capitalized or there's missing a comma here, it's just the way my brain works. I just lose it. So that's an obsession, and one that does burn some relationships because people are like, dude, this guy's nuts. Like I can't work with him.
A little OCD, right?
Yeah. When it comes to the written word, and there's very few other things that I'm OCD about, but the writing is one. I think because like I'm a big Bezos fan. I shouldn't say fan. I should say I'm in awe of what he's accomplished at Amazon and all the other businesses.
He's the greatest allocator of capital, even more so than in our day, even more so than Warren Buffett, actually. And I never thought of that until I heard Chamath on CNBC saying this. So yeah, it's a great person to look up to and think that, he's accomplished amazing things with the capital that they've had.
Yeah, I think you could make that case for sure. One of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this, Jay, and many of your listeners will as well, but he's eradicated PowerPoint. Before he left Amazon, he was well known for not allowing executives to use PowerPoint to communicate. In lieu of that, they were required to write a one-page kind of brief for everybody in the room. And the first 10 minutes of an Amazon meeting is basically everybody around the boardroom table reading the brief. And writing that brief is probably one of the most daunting tasks that Amazon executive has, because they know they've got to succinctly communicate the main points in a document that everybody's going to read. And guess what? It makes your thinking so much more clear. And you're writing a book right now, so you've probably seen this firsthand. As there's a dissonance in our brains. We think we understand something. Oh wait, yeah, I know about churn, or I know about marketing, or I know about whatever. And then we're actually forced to write it down.
Yep.
We realize there are lots of holes in our thinking, right? Lots of areas we don't exactly know. There's a few edges that need to be sharpened. And so writing something down, I think, forces a degree of intellectual rigor that is really, really important. So for example, when I see a typo, I'm like, I can't get beyond that, because it's unfortunately sullies the entire document for me. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
I got to show you something. So Anthony Scaramucci just recently released a book, right? It was called The Sweet Life of Bitcoin. On the second to last paragraph in his book, there's a big typo, like serious typo.
Oh no.
And it says in the book, if we're right, there's only going to be it says 18 million coins left to mine in 2025. It should have been 1 million. But the editors, they're looking for grammatical mistakes, typos, etc. The 18 is not a grammatical type. It's up to the author to see that, right? So I texted it to Anthony.
You brick. What did he say?
I said, typo? There's 19 million mined as of now. So only 2 million left to go by now. In 2025, there's 1 million. Did you guys miss this? And he goes, oh, shoot. We're going to have to correct that in the Kindle version. He didn't even know. I was the first one to tell him. But I picked those little things up too, and it aggravated me. It's not in my book. I can't imagine what it did with him. He's probably like yelling at the guys who did the editing. How did you not pick this up? So it's funny you said that.
But you're right. It's one of those areas where there's nothing grammatically wrong in that. It's just it's an error.
Yeah, it's really, I've dealt with this now that I'm dealing with the publisher. It's like you do have to read the work and see if things like that exist, because they're not going to see that. It's the challenge. And then they print run it, and it's like you're screwed, right? So
yeah.
John, I always say success is determined by opportunities presented, but then making the right choices with a little bit of luck sprinkled on. Do you believe in luck? And if you could tell us, maybe share one or two stories where you can tell us where you were the beneficiary of having good luck.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in luck, and the fact that we've all experienced good and bad luck in our lives, and it's how we respond to the bad luck, frankly, and how we capitalize on the good luck. This goes back 25 years ago. I used to run a quantitative market research business, and our niche in the world was helping big companies reach small businesses. So our clients were like Microsoft and Bank of America and all these big fancy clients. And the one gold standard client that we wanted to have to be kind of put ourselves on the map, so to speak, and be the quintessential company in this area was American Express. They were the gold standard when it came to marketing to small business. This is around the time they had their open brand. I don't know if you remember that, but it was kind of a big deal. And
yeah.
Anyways, I got a call from a woman who ran that division called Susan Sobbit. And she said, look, I heard about your little research company up in Toronto. Why don't you come down to New York and we'll talk about how you might be able to help American Express. And I'm like, yes, this is it. This is gonna be our deal. So I show up. I remember it was like a Tuesday night. I show up at the Toronto airport. Our meeting is set for 9:00 the next morning in New York, in Manhattan. Show up, and I get to the counter to Air Canada, and they're like, yeah, no, we can't get you to New York. It's like there's thunderstorms. All the airports are closed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, no, like everything's closed. And I'm like, oh. So I'm like, can you get me in like Hartford? No, the whole northeastern seaboard's closed. What about Boston? Anyways, long story short, I left the counter in a panic, right? So in that way, I'd experienced bad luck, right? So, okay, fair enough. So I call Amtrak. In Canada, they're called Via Rail, but I called Via Rail and said, okay, do you have a train that goes to New York? And they're like, yeah, leaves every night at 5 o'clock. I'm like looking at my watch. It's like 7:30, right? Train's left 2 hours ago. I'm like, all right. So I think, all right, well, like, how am I going to get to New York? And I decided to go flag a taxi down at the terminal. And I get into the taxi. This is like a town car kind of service in Toronto. And I'm like, all right, I've got a pretty crazy fare for you. I want to go to Toronto. And no word of, let's go to New York. And no word of a lie, he reaches between his legs and pulls out this like laminated plastic card. And there, sure enough, he's got all these destinations from Toronto. And he's got like Syracuse, Rochester. And sure enough, he's got New York City. And I'm like, all right. So we set off, and it's the middle of the night. We crossed the border. This is just after 9/11. So there's kind of a weird dude in the back of the taxi. He says he's going to New York. Like, it was kind of, anyways, I fall asleep in the back of the taxi as the storm is brewing, as we're heading into the eye of the storm. And I remember waking up to the jarring you feel when the tires are going over those markers at the side of the road, because you're about to.
He's falling asleep.
Yeah. I look in the mirror. I'm in the back. He's in the front, obviously driving, and his eyes are like half mast, right? And like the head is nodding. And I'm like, oh my God. So I get him to pull over, and like we go into like a rest stop, right? And like we're literally at the urinals, like next to each other. And I'm like, you look pretty tired. And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty tired. And I'm like, how about you let me drive? And he's like, I can't let you drive. This is my taxi. Like, you're not licensed, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, we're both from Toronto. We're in the middle of like rural New York State right now. Like, do you think anybody's going to care or even notice? Whatever. And
right.
Long story short, he lets me drive. And so from about 4 a.m. till about 8:30, I drove his cat taxi all the way into downtown Manhattan, pulled up in front of the curb in front of American Express. It was like 8:35. I haven't like brushed my teeth. My shirt's all wrinkled from being in the back of his car, or whatever. And I make it up to Susan's office before 9 and left there with the business. That account, having American Express on our sort of list of clients, was a big part of why that company was valuable. Ultimately, was acquired by a publicly traded company. And here we are 25 years later, whatever it is. So was that lucky? It was lucky that he didn't crash on the highway, right? I was super lucky that he didn't crash. I was super lucky that he was willing to come to New York, to drive to New York in the middle of the night with some weird dude who, never met before. Tons of luck. At the same time, was I unlucky because I happened to get this appointment on the day that like all the airports are closed in New York? Yeah, that's kind of unlucky, right? So to your point, like, am I lucky? A bit of both, really. But to go back to sort of parenting, which is where we started this conversation off, I remember both my boys are into baseball. And so for my older kid, he was 14. And I said, let's go down to see the College World Series in Omaha, right? Toronto. We've been looking forward to this for months, going to the College World Series, the 2 final games in the final. And we show up at the airport in Toronto. They've shut down the flight from Toronto to Omaha. There's only one. And so I remember at that time, I'm like, okay, well, we're going to get there come hell or high water. So we talked to people at the gate, and they were like, well, where can we go that's close to Omaha? And they're like, well, you could probably fly into Kansas City. And I'm like, all right, well, get us on the flight to Kansas City. And then I'd go along, and we get to the flight. We get to Kansas City, and my wife has rented a car. We're in the lineup waiting for our bags in Kansas City. And they're like, yeah, the rental company's closed. And so now we're an hour and a half away from Omaha in Kansas City. We go down to the terminal, whatever, and we flag an Uber, and we Uber all the way up. And I've reflected on it in the past, and I'm like, why did I do all that? Like, why didn't I just say, oh, well, we'll miss the first game and we'll get the flight tomorrow and we'll go home? I think maybe a little part of me, if I'm honest, was try to show my kid that when you have bad luck, you don't just sort of like turtle and pack up your bag and go home. You kind of tough it out and figure out a solution. So anyways.
I told you a story how we sold the business, and it was very similar. Bad luck, good luck, right? I told you that. Remember we were at the conference, and yes. I think it's like, I tell that story to some people and I say, I got lucky that guy was there that day and that it all worked out. And then other people tell me, I feel very lucky in that situation, but I've been told by other entrepreneur friends, they're like, no, you made your own luck. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I guess you can interpret it that
Sure.
way. Same thing when I'm hearing this. Like, I could hear in my head some of my friends that I don't want to name names, but some of my friends that are like, big successful entrepreneurs. They'd be like, no, John made his own lucky there, and it's like, yeah, that's true, like, to some extent, but it's making lemonade out of lemons, right?
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah.
But again, it's a perception, and the thing I told you about before we did this call is this whole we will thing. It's the people around you, right? That guy. If it wasn't for that guy to say yes, you have no luck, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So he was your good luck. So I think you're appropriately assessing that situation where other people take credit for that, and I don't think you should take credit for that. The other person, it was just equally as he was equally what's the word I'm looking for? Responsible for that, for you succeeding. Yeah. I mean, ultimately you had to go into that meeting and succeed, but you know what I mean, getting there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, look, we're all going to have, and when you see people who are unhappy in their situation, and we've all run into people like this. They blame other people and they feel like victims, and you kind of see a broken soul, because I think when I look at people like that, I'm like, this is not luck that's caused this, right? This is your relationship to what has happened to you in your life. This is what is where you're at. And some people have had extraordinarily difficult circumstances, but still,
Yep.
It is how you've reacted to that has left you into this sort of bitter and negative person, as opposed to, we all have bad luck, we all have some great luck, and it's kind of what you do to react to that. And so when I see people who have quote unquote had bad luck, I'm like, yeah, but there's also probably a big swath of like how you've actually chosen to wear that luck, you know what I mean? And so
there's literally somebody laying in a bed in a hospital right now dying of cancer. So with any kind of bad luck anybody has, if it's not you, you probably have better luck than that person right now. So make the best of it.
Yeah. Well said.
Do you believe in instincts and intuition? Or do you think that that's something that's learned through experiences, or is it something you believe that you were born with innately?
No, I think we instinctively grow up in an environment where we start to have instincts for things, and therefore we start to make judgments unconsciously based on our backgrounds, right? Like the instincts that we have formed. And so I think it's I think we definitely are instinctive creatures, but I don't think it's quote unquote God given or nature. I think it's our environment that makes us instinctive as people.
You develop it
through
your environment.
Yeah, like I'm not a religious person. Some people are more religious in their convictions and in their background, and they, I think, have different feelings about these topics, whereby that's not my frame of reference. So I don't have I'm not a religious person, and therefore I feel like it's any instincts that I have or in judging people or judging situations are very much environment, as opposed to quote natural or DNA or God.
So your instincts come from your environment and the people around you, the people you grew up around, your parents, teachers, things like that, right?
Yeah, we've all had thousands and thousands and thousands of little interactions through the world, as tiny babies all the way through like older adults, and we start to form these sort of judgments. I think it's why, like you think about the Archie Bunker type stereotype of the old racist, backwards kind of person. And I think it's why people become sort of intractable in their beliefs is because they've been thinking it for years and years and years, right? And they've lost that ability to come and approach a situation with a fresh set of eyes, because they are instinctive, because they built up their perceptions over 70 years or over 80 years, and therefore they become intractable. And I think that's one of the challenges of aging, frankly. And when I see older people and I see them with an open mind, a curious mind, I'm always impressed by that. I find that incredibly attractive as a trait for an older person, to still be curious. And I hope that I am that way when I am that age.
I don't know about you, but I feel like as I'm getting older, I keep catching myself that I'm starting to develop that I'm not as curious. I think I have the answers.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, wait a second.
Yes.
When I was in my 20s and my early 30s, I was like a blank book, right? It was like a blank canvas and it was being painted by everything around me. But now that you've had success is a lousy teacher, right? You start to be like, oh, no, I know the answer. And then I got to catch yourself and be like, yeah.
And maybe that's part of fatherhood too, because I think as dads, we're trying to help our kids forge their way in the world. And so we're like, well, no, you should, cross the street at the lights because you shouldn't, because you could have an accident, which is great and protective. And we've all done that, right? But when we start to project our own points of view on things to them without them learning themselves, I think it can be a slippery slope. So I watched this 60 Minutes episode with the code breakers from the Second World War. These were German-born Jews who left Germany, came to the United States, became code breakers. Did you happen to watch that segment?
No,
it was incredible. No. And these men, there are three of them that they interviewed. There were one was 99, the other was 98, 97. And it struck me how all three of them were succinct in their communication style. They were vibrant. They were intelligent. They were curious. They were contagious personalities at 97, 89, 99.
Wow.
And I'm like, if I can be half that when I'm that age, I would be forever grateful. And I think, again, part of it is being curious, and I think it gets harder as you age. I'll speak for myself. It is getting harder as I age to be curious.
Yeah, I've noticed that for me. And, I was growing up, I grew up with my stepfather, who's my dad. He raised me since I was a baby. So he's literally my dad. I mean, my biological dad is also my dad, but he didn't raise me, right? So my stepfather, to this day, still, I think, is being a dad all the time. Come to my house, it's like, you got to fix this over here. It's like he's still telling me what to do all the time. And I'm at a point, I'm just like, I don't want to hear this shit no more, And I'm like, my grandfather was like this, he was always dad, right? It never ended. And it's an Italian thing. And
no,
so,
it's not just you.
yeah. But he does this. And I've over the year, in the beginning of my 20s, I was resisting it. We would butt heads a little bit, in my 30s, even now that I'm in my 40s, I don't really butt heads with him so much now. I'm like, whatever. He's just, I'll probably do the same shit when I get older, old dog, new tricks. I don't know. But the point is, as you get older, you think you know it all, right? And, this young dog might be able to teach that old dog a couple tricks if he listened. And I'm sure my kids could teach me a couple things if I listened to them too, right? It's the same thing. So I'm not criticizing you, Dad, if you're watching this. It's just something for me to learn. I want to talk about Robert Kiyosaki. I'm sure you know Rich Dad Poor Dad, right?
Yeah. I don't know Robert personally, but I know the book. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, God, who doesn't know that book, right?
Yeah.
So he coined the term, the cash flow quadrants, which he talks about ESBI, employee to self-employed to business owner to investor, right? This is a transition as you go through the quadrant, right? And very few entrepreneurs actually ever successfully transition into a business owner, which is a business that can thrive without them, right? I think I skipped the business owner when I went through the quadrant. I went from like an employee, I had one job, I got fired, to self-employed. I read your book and I tried to become a business owner, sold the business, I think, before we quite got there. Okay. And I moved now I'm an investor, right? And when I read your book, Built to Sell, I remember in an interview I did with you a week ago, I couldn't remember the dates. It was 2013. So now I know, because I looked up when I went to Hawaii, it was 2013, cool. Right? So I was like 2011, 2012. And you didn't correct me because when you wrote the book, and I looked at it, I think it was 2012. As I looked up, I was like, wait, I was on that. I don't remember. So I looked it up. I was like, oh God. I was saying 2011. It was 2013. So I read your book 2013, and the attempt was to develop a business that can thrive without me, which is, I think, what you talk about in your book. And I'm not quite sure I quite did that before I sold it. Although I told the buyers that the business, it's not self-sustaining, right? It needs leadership, essentially, right? So what I was basically saying is, for me, I think if I died or quit the business, it would have been fine for, I don't know, 6 months, a year, maybe even, I don't know. But without that leadership, that vision, and the direction of a founder, I don't know. Like, we weren't Facebook, we weren't Google, we were, you know what I mean? Like, we were not a self-sustaining business quite yet. Your book is a great book though, because it's It's a parable about this main character, Alex Stapleton, right? And his agency business, advertising agency. And you kind of walk people through this transition of building a business that is sustainable. What gave you the idea? Because this is, like I said, it's a parable, right? It's not actually your story.
No, it's
I was reading the book the first time I read it. I didn't realize that initially. And then I read through it again. I was like, oh, wait a second. The author's not Alex. Like, I read the book and I wasn't so sure, John, right? And then when I looked at the cover after I was finished, I told you I read it like in one sitting in Hawaii. I was on the beach up in the hotel, right? And afterwards I was like, this is a great book. I get more from this guy, Alex. And I'm like, who the hell's John? Right? So I'm just curious, like, how did you develop this story? Like, what is this story? It's amazing, by the way. And where did you come up with this amazing story?
Well, thank you. It is a fictional story, but it's inspired by some of my own personal experiences having built a few companies. One was an advertising agency, marketing services company. So some of the references to, logo palettes and stuff like that, I came by honestly, but it was really, an amalgam of what some of the things I'd learned from many of the mentors that I'd had in building valuable companies, who kind of, you can think of as a mashup of sort of the Ted Gordon character, which is the sort of sage advisor along the way. And it's really about, as you rightly point out, it's like, how do you go from what Kiyosaki would say would be like your self-employed person, right? Who largely has a job. They may have a few employees, but they're probably, the business isn't really very valuable without them, to an asset, a business that you own, but don't necessarily have to do all the work. And Michael Gerber was the first one to coin the term and the E-Myth called working on, not in the business. A lot of the kind of sentiment comes from that same idea of how do you structure it so that you're not doing the work. And that's when you have a transferable asset. Now, you're selling yourself short. In your case, you had lots of other assets and the business could thrive without you for at least 6 months. And so, there needed to be a leader. Some businesses literally shut down the day that the owner stops working, right? And that's where you have a self-employed individual.
Hairdresser.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So there's a system I think you can follow to transfer from a self-employed individual to a business owner. I think that there's a relatively well-trodden road, and I tried to describe what that is in the book, Built to Sell, on how do you go from self-employed to a business owner effectively.
And when you came up with this idea, this was, I'm guessing, prior to the publishing of it, how long did it take you to write the book? And how did you go about it? Like, I want to write this book. What was the impetus? Like, I got to do this because, like, why did that happen? Like, tell me how that all came about.
I had sold my last company and had left the acquiring business, and I had lunch with a guy that I was put in touch with through my lawyer, and his name is Tom, and he's written a book, also a parable, and we were kind of regaling each other with our sort of entrepreneurial journeys and the different businesses that we've been involved in. And he's like, "Man, you got to write a book," and I'm like, "What do you, like, why?" And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, like, I think people would find it interesting." And I'm like, "All right." And so I left that lunch. The guy's name, the book that this individual Tom wrote, is called Every Family's Business, which was about family business transitions. Anyways, I left that and started writing it. I'd sold my company, so I didn't have another gig to go to. A lot of people write a book because they want to promote a company. I did not have that situation.
Sure.
I didn't have any.
That's like me now. I have nothing to promote.
Right. There's like no back end. There's no click funnel. There's nothing. Yeah. Right? Like it's just.
Yeah. There's no funnel.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, here's a book. And I just decided to start writing first thing in the morning. And that's what I've learned.
So, but just to be clear, so when you wrote Built to Sell, you didn't have a funnel on that book.
No,
right?
there was nothing.
At the end of that book. I don't remember that. There was nothing. I remember last chapter wasn't a commercial in any way. Yeah.
No. So yeah, I went to the third floor of my house where I had an office, and I just started writing. And it was actually incredibly cathartic. Because what's nice about writing fiction is you can let your mind wander. You don't have to, like, oh, what was the date of that? And check back. How do you spell that? Like, none of that. It's just, you can literally let your creative freedom wander. And when like reality bites you in the ass, you're like, oh, well, that's not what happened. You can just make up what happened, right? Like, you don't have to have answer to anybody in fiction, which is why I love the format. Some people think it's a cop-out to write a parable. I think it actually provides a great platform to provide an educational story. So Gerber's was a parable. There's lots of examples of parables that have had traction.
What's the name of his book again? I'm going to look that up.
Michael Gerber's The E-Myth.
And I'm sorry. What was the other one?
Pat Lencioni, he's written a bunch of parables. Can't think of any others.
The family one. Is that the family
Every
one?
Family's Business. Yeah. So for me, I think someone told me once that a business book is generally about 40,000 words. And so for me, if you give me enough caffeine and you don't interrupt me, I can usually hammer out between 500 and 1,000 words before I start to like really break down as a writer. And so if you think about it, that's probably somewhere between 40 and 80 days. If you do it consistently, it's not that long, like a month and a half, 2 months to 3 or 4 months. I have found and I've written.
How did you structure? I'm just curious. How did you structure then? So did you figure out like an outline first and then you start filling in stories? Like, cause I'm doing stories right now. So how did you do it? Start to finish?
I just literally wrote, like I kind of made it up. I did not have an outline. I made it up.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
I sat down and I started to think, okay, what did I write? What were the 500 words I wrote yesterday? And how does the story going to now like evolve from here? So
that's incredible. Wow.
The automatic customer.
It seems like you're telling a story, but you just created the story. And like you said, loosely based on your own experiences.
Yeah. I mean, it's what any fiction writer does. They try to they make it all up, which is kind of fun. I wrote, so Built to Sell came out in 2011. In 2015, I wrote a book called The Automatic Customer. It was about subscription business models. And like Anthony Scaramucci in the error that you pointed out, I was desperately worried that I was going to make an error like that, right? And so The Automatic Customer was a very painful book to write because I desperately wanted to get it right. I didn't want to screw up the stories or the entrepreneurs involved or any of the data. There's a lot of metrics that point out like how do you run a recurring revenue model. And I was living in fear that I would make a Scaramucci. Like I would make that kind of an error and it would forever be, oh yeah, Warrillow, he's the guy who wrote the book that totally screwed up the blah, blah, blah. Anyways, to my knowledge, someone will be able to tell me on Twitter, yeah, here are the 6 mistakes in The Automatic Customer. But
let me go read it tomorrow. I'll tell you.
Glaring in there.
I'll text you.
But it was
funny.
Much less enjoyable process as a result because I was worried about, what year did that company do that? And what was how do I spell the last name of the guy? Like when you're writing fiction, you just make it up, which is a real luxury. But the books I've written since then are much, much, much harder to write in a lot of ways.
And so I think I sent you an email. I sent it to Jeff Booth and a few other friends that I know authored some books, and I'm just trying to go through this process myself. Some of the books you've written, you've had a publisher involved, and you've also done self-publishing. Yep. Can you go through those decisions on how you decided to do that and what the experiences were? Yeah,
I can touch on them for sure. So Built to Sell was self-published in the beginning. Yeah. I got it to a guy named Bo Burlingham, who at the time was an editor-in-chief of Inc. magazine, editor-at-large of Inc. magazine. He also wrote The Great Game of Business with Jack Stack and Stake in the Outcome and Small Giants. He's a very good author. And I got him a copy of Built to Sell. I think I knew we had a friend of a friend, and I sent him a copy saying, hey, what do you think? And hoping, I guess I would get an endorsement from him. And he read it amazingly because he's a busy guy. And he said, this is a decent book. You should probably get this published like legitimately. And I said, okay, well, how do you do that? He said, like, let me put you in touch with my agent. And so I got in touch with his agent, and she said, yeah, I'll take it on. And so she pitched it to the big 5 publishers in New York, and Random House picked it up and then published Built to Sell under the Random House masthead. So that's that's kind of a cool thing. That was not my intent anyway, that's how that happened.
Did they give you like an advance on that, or how does that all work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
So you got a little money. That's cool.
Yeah. So the way a publishing deal happens is you usually get an advance on royalties. So you agree to a set of royalties, which again, I know you know this, but maybe some of your listeners would benefit. So for every book you sell, you get a certain amount. It's usually a very small amount, and they give you.
That was surprising, by the way. But
yeah, they give you an advance against that. So let's just use round numbers. Let's say your advance is $100,000 and you get $1 per book, right? So you got to sell 100,000 books to work off your advance in that case. And then on the 101st,
What if you never get there?
well, then it's a non-refundable advance. In most cases,
Okay.
you don't have to pay the money back.
They assume.
I've never heard of a deal where you have to pay the money back. It's a non-refundable advance in essence. In fact, most businesses most books never work off their advance, meaning they never reach the point of getting royalties. They're always underwater.
Interesting.
Yet in my silly example of $100,000 advance and $100 per book, when you sell your 101st book, you start to get royalties. And that's the way that model works. That's the model I used for the automatic customers. So I went back to Random House, which is the same publisher as Built to Sell, and said, "Hey, you've got this new idea for book." They said, "Yeah," and they bought it. Meaning they gave me an advance, and we published that book. The next book, called The Art of Selling Your Business, I went back to the same guys, and they're like, it's just too nichey. And The Art of Selling Your Business is really for people like you, Jay, in the sense that you built a successful company. It's usually multi-million dollars in revenue, and you want to punch above your weight when you go to sell it. Well, the universe of people that fit that bill is tiny, right? Because for every one Jay Gould, there's like probably 1,000 people trying to start a business, or self-employed individuals trying to make it
just trying to get scale.
Yeah. And so they need to read Built to Sell or B-Myth or books about how to build a business. The universe of people who want to sell one is very small. I wanted to write The Art of Selling Your Business because it's for me, it's a passion project. It's something that lights my world up, is to sort of help people punch back against this, what I see as this sort of mercenary group of investors. But it didn't have a broad audience. And so that book it came out under the Inc. masthead, which is a partnership they have with a company called Greenleaf, where it's kind of a hybrid publishing model. You get a bigger percentage of your sales, but you don't get usually in advance. So it's a hybrid model where
that's what I'm talking to right now. It's probably a masthead. So there's a company.
So it's
not one of the big five. They have distribution from Simon Schuster, but it's another publisher that works with them for the distribution. They give you more percentage, but they don't give you an advance.
Yeah. And that's great if you've got if you've got an audience, you've got a platform like you do that you don't necessarily need the platform or masthead of like a Random House. I mean, Simon & Schuster or Random House, like they will always, I think, be the good housekeeping seal of approval that says this book is not a vanity project for the author, right? And I think that's the death knell of any book. And I think what makes me queasy about self-publishing is that people are going to look at it and go, this is just a vanity play for the author. This is just their victory lap, right? And as soon as you have that brand name like a Random House, it basically distinguishes you. Say, no, look, this is a legit book. Now, 50 years ago, that was very true. Today, I think it's much less. It's much less a halo. That brand of a major publisher is much less necessary to be considered. But I think there's still a segment of the population that are going to view a self-published book through, a jaundiced eye, so to speak. But I think it's becoming smaller and smaller every day.
Yeah, and as I'm going down this rabbit hole, I started to look, and it's like the average book only has 250 copies sold on average.
Wow,
that's amazing.
Yeah, talk about never working off your advance. You're never going to work off an advance.
I mean, they're not getting any advances. That's all self-publishing, probably, to your point, right? It's victory laps.
Yeah, book publishing is, look, it can be a very difficult way to make a living. And then, there are people like Russell Brunson who have built amazing businesses, ClickFunnels, off the back of great books that are really good, serve a purpose, solve a problem for a reader. But it's a very, very well-structured front end to a ClickFunnel. It's not like he's trying to sell books to make a living. It's a front end piece of a very elaborate, very sophisticated ClickFunnel, and he's built an amazing, piece of software, an amazing software business.
I mean, in all honesty and sincerity, like your book, Built to Sell, should have been a ClickFunnel. It should have been a book commercial, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it was perfectly set up for the last, and maybe in some ways I actually was more receptive to the book, that you didn't say, oh, remember all these problems I was talking about for the last 9-10 chapters? I have a solution for you. I have a consulting service.
Right.
Like then I'd be like, oh man, this guy's selling me, but you didn't sell anything. So I was like, no, this is perfect. I mean, it was not so great for you because it was just book sales, but you probably made more money in consulting and otherwise.
No,
but yeah, I mean,
you know what? At the time, I sold my last company, so I wasn't necessarily looking to get back into something else. So it was fine. It served its purpose, and it's now.
So the art of selling a business, art of selling your business, that has a ClickFunnels towards the end. Because you have a business now, right?
Yes. It's very much.
Tell us about your business, Value Builder.
Yeah, practice management software for business advisors. So it's interesting for Built to Sell. Again, I had no ClickFunnels in place. I was trying to think of ways that we might sell books. And so I bought the URL bestselling.com and I made it like a brochureware site. This is like back in 2011. So it was kind of a brochureware site for the book. And I decided I wanted to put a little tool on there. And the tool was sort of like a men's health survey about like those men's health, like what kind of lover are you? Or like what kind of athlete are you? You answer 10 questions and it'll tell you like, hey, you're a whatever. Same thing. I wanted to do a little questionnaire and to help a business owner determine how sellable their company was. Called it the sellability score. So you answered like 10 questions and it would give you a score. Well, a couple months after launching this website, I started to get calls from advisors like business brokers, M&A advisors, accounting firms saying, we like that tool, that little lead gen tool you've got on your website. Can we license it from you? Can we buy it from you? Can we steal it? Can we use it? Like all the above. And we were living in Europe at the time, our family, and I didn't really think much of it, but I started to realize that given how many calls we got to use that there would be a business model in helping advisors sort of start this exit planning conversation with business owners. Because for a lot of advisors, they're really good at what they do, M&A professionals, accounting firms, financial advisors, but they really struggle to win new clients. And so that's kind of the problem we tried to solve with Value Builder. So it's practice management software for advisors who want to have this exit planning conversation with business owners.
It's interesting. And I got to say, when you say that it's not a very wide audience, I think it's a huge audience of people that want to sell their businesses, but maybe to the points you're making, most of them are not sellable. And that's why you have that sellability score, I think, right? Because when they actually sit down and think about their business, who would want to buy it? And that's kind of the purpose of your book, is you need to make a business that is something that is sustainable, that somebody wants to buy, because no one wants to buy your problems. They want to buy a sustainable business that's growing.
Yeah, they want to build something that can exist without you as the owner. And I use the analogy, we've talked a lot about parenting today. For so many entrepreneurs, we chase the top line, right? Like it's how we at an EO meeting, it's like, who's the biggest dick in the room? Sorry to use that expression. Who's the smartest person in the room? Who's the whatever, but who's got the most revenue, right? Like that's the way we sort of acknowledge one another and like size each other up, like, animals in the jungle. And the Inc. 5000 is the 5,000 fastest growing businesses, right? Like it's all top line revenue. And I think that leads to a culture where revenue is kind of vanity. And that's how we sort of focus our lives and our businesses. And yet I've seen so many examples through Built to Sell Radio where people sell at a fraction of what they're worth because they build a big business that's basically built on them. And so I talk a lot about this idea of being your business's parent, not its CEO. And so you think about, you got 4 kids, Jay. You think about your biggest aspiration for your kids. I mean, what like, let me ask you, in 20 years, what do you hope your kids will be like? Do you have aspirations? Do you want them to go to Harvard? Do you want them to be in the New York Philharmonic?
I do actually have some things that I would hope for them. But ultimately what I always struggle with, and I just want them to be happy. I know it sounds corny and cliche, but I really do want them to be happy. But a lot of my friends are like in this camp now, kids don't need to go to college. I don't agree with that. I think I want my kids to go to college because I think it's important for them to see the world differently, get outside of this house, outside of this neighborhood, this town, see people from all over the world when they go to school, learn different cultures, understand different people and how they think, talk, etc. That's important. And if they can get into Harvard and they're accepted, I absolutely want them to go there, because the pedigree that you and I did not have the benefit of, I would love for my kids to have that benefit if they could. But outside of that, I don't really care what the college is if it's not a top tier school, as long as they just go to a school. But then for professionally, I don't care what they do. I
Yeah,
just want them to be
it
happy.
sounds like you want them to be independent and happy. And so I think that's
Self-sufficient.
self-sufficient. Remember those words: self-sufficient, independent, and happy. And I think that's the greatest aspiration most of us have as parents of our children, right? Like, some people have these like obsessions with them becoming the quarterback with the Alabama, blah, blah, blah. But for most of us, it's
No.
like, if my kid is happy in the world, doing something they like, and they're independent, they can, awesome.
I want to leave this planet knowing they don't need me anymore and they're happy.
Box checked, right?
That's it.
I think if you take the same view of your business and you say, my goal is not to hit the next zero in terms of top line revenue, it's to make a decision today that makes my business less dependent on me.
Yep.
Be the parent of your business. Think of your company as a teenager who, over time, you've got to teach them to kind of get out on their own, right? And to make a few mistakes within a certain kind of confines, so they're not totally making huge life-altering mistakes. Yeah. But that's sort of the mentality that I try to talk to people about. Instead of chasing top-line revenue, think, okay, I'm the parent of my business. The ultimate expression of entrepreneurship is to bring this baby, this business, into the world so that it can succeed without me. And that's the definition of success in entrepreneurship, is that you've created a human being as a parent, and you've created
a living
business,
organism,
a living organism that is not dependent on you. And that is, I think, the ultimate expression of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't think I quite got there. We sold the business, and I think about 3 years in, they finally just shut that down. They changed the name somewhere in between that. They bought other digital companies. They sold them all off. They got out of digital for the most part. They didn't really listen to me. I wish they would have listened to me more. I think it would have succeeded if they'd done the things. And by the way, it wasn't a strategic or vision issue. It was more alignment and structure and incentives. They didn't set that up properly with my team. So this is, if you're a buyer out there, they got to learn things too, not just the sellers, right? You got to keep people motivated. You have to have incentives aligned in such a way that my staff doesn't leave and go off to other opportunities. They stay and build this.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest areas of failure, I think, in M&A is employee compensation. I'll give you an example. I did an interview with a woman named Sherry Deutschman out of Nashville, and she built a great little business doing billing for hospitals. Like, they would send out the statement saying, yeah, it was 50 grand for your COVID treatment or whatever. She built this business from the bottom up. Right. She tells a story of she used her first desk was an old door that she put on 2 sawhorses. Like, that's how kind of raw it was. In the early days, she hired a lot of hourly workers. And from almost the very beginning, she said, I'm going to put in a profit sharing plan. And you can imagine a bootstrap business of a couple of employees. There wasn't much profit to go around. And so she would have these monthly meetings where she'd bring her employees together. In the early days, it was like 2 or 3 people, and she would hand out these profit sharing checks. And they were like, for like $17 and $42. Like, it was a very modest, affair. Well, the business grew, and it grew and it grew and it grew all the way to more than 50 employees when she received an offer from a private equity group. And the private equity group, I think they offered her 7 times EBITDA for a kind of a industrial bricks and mortar kind of business. It's a good number. And so she took it. And within weeks, the private equity group came and looked at her P&L and said, look, what's line item number 76 here is your profit sharing plan. It looks like you're spending $28,642 a year on that. Well, we can certainly eliminate that and improve our profit, almost overnight. And Sherry's like, no, you can't do that. That's part of our culture. Like, it's what we've done since the beginning. And then they're like, yeah, but it's $28,461. I mean, like, clearly we can't have that on our. They eliminated it. When I interviewed Sherry, first of all, she was devastated personally for the people she had employed. Many of them hourly workers had the rug pulled out from under it. They'd gone from 50 of her legacy employees. I think they were down to 4 or 5 of those 50 still remaining in the company. And, just to your point, you've got to align the incentives and the way people are compensated, the perks, the salary, the bonuses, the extras, like that's all part of your culture. And when you get acquired, that piece is very fragile. And you rightly point out the difficulty of that.
We had an issue like this. At least two, might have been 3 or 4, but at least 2 people became millionaires working for us, commissions and otherwise, and I'm very proud of that, very happy about that actually, because I think we changed their lives in some ways. One of them is a very good friend of mine. Actually, I had one job ever, and I was plopped next to this guy in a cubicle, and he was a sales guy, and I always wanted him to come work for me because I got fired from that job doing the internet stuff on the side. So I always tried to bring him over. And at the time, it was like this bootstrap thing out of my mom's house. Then I had a couple people, and slowly over the years, different companies, as you know the story. And I can never get him to come work for me. When we sell to Nexstar Broadcasting, he calls me up all excited. He's like, "I'm so happy for you." Genuinely happy, by the way, right? Some people are not so happy. That's another topic we can go into. But he was genuinely happy. I know because he's been through the whole story of my career. Can I get a job? I was like, now you want a job? We sold the company. And he's like, but this is a public company. He's like, this is great. Da, da, da. I was like, and he was working for a big company too. I was like, sure, come on over. I get a nice incentive structured compensation plan for him, commissions, et cetera. We sell the company. A year after I'm no longer there. We sell the company. About a year or so later, I'm kind of pushed myself out of the business, so to speak. Took a side step, whatever you want to call it. I'm a consultant for the business, He's like, they're trying to call me up personally. He's like, they're trying to change my commission structure. I was like, I have influence, maybe. I have no control anymore, right? So I reach out to the guy who I put in place, and he's worked a couple things, kept it for as long as he could, but eventually is exactly what you said. From the top down, they're trying to figure out how to finagle more profit out of the business. So they're taking it from the employees by changing their structures. And he's no longer there, right? Like he's moved on to other ad tech companies and is doing quite well. There's a reason why you need to have this in place. It's about alignment. Everything, people have to feel aligned with the business, and it's not always money, right? Because not everybody has a commission job, right? We did little things like we took people out to baseball games. We have a minor league baseball team here in the Toms River area in New Jersey. We would go to a baseball game and pay for everybody to go, and the food and the culture was cool. Bean bags, graffiti on the walls. Like, it was just relaxed. Tech company in an area that doesn't have tech companies, and all young 20 somethings and 30 somethings, and free booze, pizzas for lunch.
It's part of the culture.
But they got to keep doing these things, right? And they didn't keep doing those things over time. They finally shut our office down here, moved them up to the New York City office, and people had to make a choice. Do you want to come up? Or otherwise you could leave. They just made it corporate. They made it very, very corporate, Not unexpected to some extent, because I remember the buyers even saying there were some clues, when you look back and you rewind the tape, there were clues in the negotiations. I wouldn't have not sold it over these reasons. I had to do that personally. But I could see the clues later, when I look back, and I was like, they did say this and that. And okay, because one of the things they said to me is, we don't have valuations. We were negotiating price. We don't have valuations. We don't give valuations on companies like Google or Facebook. They're trying to set the tone and anchor the price down lower, right? But it was overall, it's like this is their culture, right? There's a lot of little things like that. So if you're out there and you're thinking about selling your company, you really got to structure, I think, earnouts. I didn't have an earnout structured in there for myself or my employees. I thought we could work that out afterwards, because they kept saying, no, we're buying this. We could figure that out later. And they never did. It's a shame.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because employee compensation is one way acquirers mess this up. The other way is using an earnout when you've got different goals. So earnouts, for folks who don't know, is basically where you accept a certain portion of your payment at risk, contingent on you hitting certain goals as a division of the acquiring company. And they could be great if the acquirer's goal is to run your division like a completely separate autonomous unit. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like Nest and Google is maybe a good example, where Google owns Nest.
Or YouTube.
YouTube is another good
separate.
example.
CEO, CFO.
Yeah,
totally
they're very independent businesses. Nest, at least, you've got a hardware component, so they're even more independent. But the point is, an earnout can be great if your intention is to allocate capital to a certain business and let that business run virtually autonomously. You then may ask yourself, well, why am I buying this company? If there's no strategic integration that we want to do, what's the point of buying this business? Which leads me to the reason that most earnouts fail is because most acquirers think they want to run the business independently, but actually what they want to do is integrate. But what they really want to do is take advantage of the strategic integrations that exist. And at every point of integration, there's going to be like sandpaper for the founder entrepreneur, because the founder is going to want to hit their earnout at all costs, which is largely going to be independent of you. And the business, the acquiring business, is going to want to integrate. And integration is almost always at the expense of the earnout. And so those two things are allergic to one another. And so if your goal is to integrate and take advantage of strategic overlays or strategic opportunities by buying this business, don't use an earnout, because it's just a recipe for a tumultuous relationship with the entrepreneur. Equally, if the goal is to run it as a completely independent business unit, you might ask, unless you're a private equity group who just have to place capital, or family office or something, you might be saying, like, why are you buying this business if it's not for integration? So I think earnouts can be they're overused, frankly, as a mechanism to try to get owners to give up their companies for less than they're worth. And I think there are certain situations where they work out, but in many other cases they don't.
John, before we hop, I got one more question for you on your book, Built to Sell. I happened to reach out to you, right? We had a mutual friend, Dave Kirkman.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, do you know him? Because I think maybe he saw something he posted with you too or something.
Yeah, I interviewed Dave for Bestselling Radio.
You did? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I said, I totally want to interview him on my show because I first of all, I want to publicly thank you, which I did on your show, but I want to do it on my show too. So thank you for writing your book, because your book really helped me refocus, right? So thank you. And then also I wanted to ask you, because Dave connected us and stuff. I'm just curious, how many people reach out to you that you've touched and reached and helped? Because I feel like I'm not in an unusual circumstance over the last 10 years.
I'll tell you, it is a wonderful feeling, and it's one of the tremendous benefits of writing a book, is that it does, if you're lucky, have an impact for some people, and that may be 2 people, in which case, great. It may be 200. I did an interview. Do you know a guy named Patrick Bet-David? I think I'm getting that right.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
absolutely.
He's written
Valuetainment.
Yeah, Valuetainment. He wrote a great book called Your Next 5 Moves, I think. And anyways, he was very gracious to have me on his show, and he said, "Look, I read Built to Sell, and it kind of changed the way I thought about the business, whatever." And
oh wow, I didn't know that.
And it was a really, and he's gone on to have tremendous success. And I was just having lunch with my wife about an hour before we got on this interview, and I was scrolling through my Twitter feed, and I happened to follow Patrick, and he's doing a basically unboxing of his Ferrari, some super fancy Ferrari. And I'm like, see, my wife, I showed my wife, and I'm like, see, I have an impact. You didn't know that. It was cute, but look, I don't want to overstate. Your email to me was very generous. Thank you for acknowledging that. Occasionally I do get an email from people that say, hey, I read your book, I made an impact, small or big, it means the world to me. So it's amazing to think that a little book that I wrote in the 3rd floor of my house, has been able to have a life beyond
it's fantastic
the walls of my home. So I appreciate that.
And let me tell you, Patrick is a phenomenal, people don't know who Patrick Bet-David is. Go on YouTube, look up Valuetainment. I can't imagine you didn't. He has like 3 million subscribers. He's killing it, but that's not really his success. His success is his insurance business, which is totally a business. Like, he doesn't even need to be involved. He is the face of that business. He does the conferences and all stuff, but he built a really amazing business. I've learned a lot about that guy. I've read about him.
He's got a super nice car.
yeah, and I think he's moved to Miami too. Didn't he move to Miami recently? He's got a beautiful house.
Yeah.
Before we go, one more question. Now that you just said that, I'm just curious, how many copies have you sold in the last 10 years? What is, because I feel like this is a book that's probably done pretty well, right?
Yeah, it'd be into the hundreds of thousands, not in the millions, but into the 6 figures.
That's great.
Yeah, something like that.
John, appreciate you coming on my show. Thank you for bringing me on your show. That was an honor. I'm just, having you on my show is an honor. So having me on your show as well, I can't even thank you enough. But again, nice to meet you in person twice now. I want to keep in touch because I think it can help me maybe when I'm writing this book a little bit as I get through the process. But I really do appreciate you. And I just want to say thank you. And once again, guys, John Warrillow, author, Built to Sell.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be with you.